Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our...
The Red Mites with Avian Empire and Bioforce.
It's a question we get a lot, so we figured we might as well do this instead of explaining ourselves a million times over.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of questions.
All right, so I'll start off by getting everyone who's in here to introduce themselves and kind of give a little bit of why they...
Did you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess so. Why I have the right to talk about this in the first place. I'm Gemma. I'm half of Avian Empire. My background sort of sits in design and rehab. So I've been doing rehab for about 8-9 years.
Bird
rehab specifically.
You've dealt with a lot of mites.
I've dealt with a lot of mites.
Yeah, big aviaries.
Yep, small aviaries.
All different species.
And yeah, I do a lot of breeding.
So you got a lot of tricks.
Yeah.
Up your sleeve.
Yeah. I understand the feels of
and the frustrations.
And the frustrations of the person. All right, Sam.
Yeah, so my name's Sam. I'm the other half of Avian Empire. My background is more ecology, veterinary medicine. But I've got a bit of a liking for entomology as well, which is how I got to meet Chris here. So yeah, that's my sort of background. So I deal a lot with a lot of chooks, a lot of backyard flocks, a lot of pet birds. So I come at it from a bit of a different angle than everybody else. But hopefully I can speak to it well. Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Thompson. I'm the General Manager of Bioforce. So my background's been integrated pest management. So not just using biological controls, but using all the available tools to combat problems. We do sell biologicals like parasitoids, predatory mites, predatory insects, but there are things that are outside of our product range that we have to deal with that interfere with our customers. So we have to look at it from a holistic view. Yeah. And know what can work with
all
what.
The angles, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Chris, I'll get you to kind of go over a little bit about red mites generally. Like, what are they?
Well, we sort of started this because I was having a big problem. And I was doing a lot of research about biological sort of control because I was noticing that there was issues with resistance to a lot of products, especially things like ripcord and things like that. And that's where I got in contact with you. Eh?
So for those of you who don't know, Sam actually does look after quite a lot of poultry in the country. So large scale farms and large scale farms. So when they have a problem, it's quite a big problem. So the need to come up with a solution is pretty
well, it's usually big, it's usually costly, and then there's usually a lot of welfare issues to take into account. And so we needed something that was effective but also economical. And because I have an interest in sort of moving people away from the typical chemical controls and stuff too, because of resistance, because of some of the residue issues, because of some of the ecological issues. I was happy to know that Chris pretty much just lives down the road for me. And we started to kind of bang our heads together to see what sort of solves we could have. But I'll let you take it from there, Chris. You want to tell us a little bit about our discussions on red mite and sort of the path we took?
Yeah, so the red mites are a parasitic mite that feed on chickens and all sorts of poultry's blood. And they do this through the night, but they don't reside on the birds during the day. So we're able to take advantage of this behavior where the red mites migrate off your birds during the night, during the day into the walls of the coop, and they'll hide in there and they'll come back each night, time and time again, keep sucking away. And often it can go unnoticed for really long periods of time because as a parasite, they don't really want to kill the bird because it's their food source. But when you get into summer and the birds start getting stressed, you get hot days and all sorts of things like that, that's when you can get birds just carking it, getting anemia and going downhill very quickly. And I mean, that's disadvantaged for the red mites when they kill their host, but they are very happy in walking very, very long periods and distances to get to other birds. And they're able to reside in and around your house and your farms for around about 18 months, some reports out to 2 years without feeding on a bird. And at that point, they can come back and reinfest you. So it's, and they can be carried by all sorts of, all sorts of other wild birds that are going to come in and have a go at any of your birds' foods, your birds' scraps that are around there, your sparrows, pigeons, seagulls, everything.
There's some papers now where they're on other species as well. So we've got some evidence that they suck blood off people, where people are getting lots of sort of bites around the collars or cuffs of their clothes. We've got some issues showing up on pets, cats and dogs and stuff too, on real bad infestation. So they're starting to, when they're starting to run out of chook, they're looking for other things.
Yeah. The first thing I kind of want to talk about a little bit is why do we seem to get infestations, like really large infestations for some people, and some people get almost nothing? Like what causes a huge overload of red mite infestation? Oh, yeah. Like what are the?
Do you want to go, Chris?
Yeah.
I'll go.
Yeah, I can add a little bit of insight to that. Like usually, because there's a multitude of factors of why this can happen, but one of the key ones are if you're not looking for them, they can go undetected for long periods and build up a giant colony. And especially in summer, like if you've come through spring, they're there in medium numbers. Because they're on the birds at night and they retreat early in the morning, they might not be visible in the coop when you're there collecting eggs or feeding your chickens. So it's really good to put out monitoring traps to check, because where there's one, there's bound to be more, and plenty more usually.
Well, and their generation time is usually what, 7 days, 10 days?
Yeah.
Sooner if it's really warm and humid.
Yeah. So it's and depending where you are based, like if there's a lot of other wildlife, a personal friend of mine found that her neighbor's chickens were running into her property at around about 3 o'clock in the morning every single day. 2 months later, their chicken coop was rancid with red mites. And it's the behaviors of the chickens to try and pass the problem on to someone else. So if they can be there at another hefty food supply when the mites are going to be coming off them, that's an ideal situation for them to help try and clean up their own home. So you got to sort of think about that. I've dealt with quite a few customers that live near forests where there's a lot of birds. They clear out their coops time and time again, but it doesn't take too long before a reinfestation will come. And you've got so many that can be living in the forest that are just going to keep crawling. You've got a beautiful area where the mites can smell all these nice chickens they want to be biting, all in one nice little place. So that it's a magnet for them.
But we're not going to get rid of them. And I think that's one misconception that we probably need to talk about. Like they're pervasive a lot, just in the wild, across a lot of different birds and a lot of different environments. And really it's more about managing the numbers versus trying to eliminate them. Is that about right?
That's definitely right, because a small amount of red mites in there is not going to be damaging to the birds. It's when their numbers get out of control and the bird's health starts to decline that you've got welfare issues and safety issues and health issues with the birds. So keeping them at a low number is really the sort of best outcome you can really hope for, because if you think you've eliminated them and you're happy and you walk off, one's going to walk straight back in.
All right, I'll get Santa a little bit, go over from what we see in terms of keeping a coop. Like what is the best scenario that you can have for a coop to keep it clean and keep it as
Well,
low on red mites as physically possible?
In my experience, the best thing you can kind of do on the coop husbandry level is just making sure that your coop is easy to clean and of the right material so that it's easy to clean. We're finding things with a lot of cracks, things that have a lot of wood. Wood is really good for insulation, but it also keeps those red mites nice and cozy over the winter and stuff too. But those things with cracks, real complex sort of coops and aviary systems. The red mite historically is, I think historically was found in birds' nests. So in a lot of where it's discovered as a parasite in the nesting of birds. So it goes on to the little birds, and then it would be transferred that way from bird to bird. They'd be on it at night, or they'd have to fly and make another nest, and it would move there, or they'd carry some of the eggs over to the next nest type thing. So bearing that in mind when you're building a coop, that you know, these red mites like to live up high in things. That sort of the higher the better, and they're used to kind of going up into the tree to sort of hide in the cracks and then come down at night to feed on the birds, or into the nest to feed on the birds. So that's an important behavior too, Chris? Because when we're talking about like predator mites or intervening in when those mites are, it's a little bit about putting barriers in between the mites and you. But I think the first thing for coops is it's got to be cleanable. You've got to simplistic. Everything should be able to be washed out really quick.
Yeah, we always say that Coop Cleaning is 90% of your battle when it comes to red mites.
Yeah.
I know it's really hard, especially when you get up to like heavy numbers of birds, like how hard it can be to keep a coop relatively clean. But if you want to keep numbers down, it's just one of those tough things you have to face.
Well, yeah. Well, we design like free range farms and things like that. We will design them to be easily clean, so that you can go in there in an afternoon, you know. And these will be some large barns and stuff too, but all the material is resistant to chemicals, or we have drains and stuff, so everything can get washed down and processed really quick, so we can start from as scratch as we can. And like I would suggest, that's probably a great way for a backyard coop. One of the worst things I've seen, and it can be really difficult to get them out once they're in, is keeping them in your house sometimes. So yeah, like I'm not trying to disparage anybody who has pet birds that come in and stuff, but it is something you're going to want to just be careful of, because they don't just bite birds, they will bite people too. So yeah, which kind of brings us maybe to our next point after coop cleaning, would be monitoring.
Yeah, now there's some really like good examples online as to how to do a good monitoring system, and it's really simplistic. It's just a piece of doweling inside a pipe essentially, and you're just putting that like under perches or in crevices that you think would be attractive to red mites, and you're just pulling that doweling out of the pipe and then just seeing if there's red mites. And it's just a case of working out like what kind of numbers you're looking at, whether it's low, like you've got 1 to 10 on the doweling, or it's medium, you've got 10 to like probably 100 on the doweling, or if it's like a heavy burden, like the doweling is like covered.
You're 100 plus.
So that's always a really good system to just have, just so you know, so that you can intervene a lot sooner than what you usually would.
Yeah, if you're not looking, you're never going to find it, eh?
So it's bad.
It's one of, I think that's one of the big things for integrated pest management, isn't it, Chris? Monitoring
is scouting, monitoring, because without that, it's really the key to know what's coming at you, and is it increasing? Because if it's just always sitting at one mite in the dowel, it's probably not so bad. But if you've got one mite there, you go out next week, it's 10. Next week, the dowel's covered. You're going to really need to get on to doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where we're starting to overutilize a bunch of pretty nasty things, because I think when you don't monitor and then all of a sudden things are out of control, and you all of a sudden notice things are out of control, people resort to
nuclear options,
because you can't let a lot of red mites just infest your birds, like you have to move pretty quickly. So we're just going to go over a couple of the options, the popular options that we see online as to why they're either good or not good. I assume both of you are going to have opinions on both options.
Me have an opinion, whatever.
All right. First one I'm going to start with is diesel.
Well,
Who wants
okay.
to have a go
Jesus.
at that one?
But hang on, before we, I think it's important, this one, because it is controversial, but like we got to remember, like people are getting to the ends of their ropes.
Yep.
Like you're walking into your coop, there's hundreds, potentially
getting
thousands of red mites,
Mhm.
and then you go to use something like ripcord, and you don't want to be spraying your birds.
Mhm.
Ripcord kills like almost every insect you can find. It's not great for the environment. So people are like, the problem is so bad, people have to resort for things that aren't necessarily traditionally treatments or medications.
Yeah.
So like diesel's not great. I think everyone's going to admit that. Like no one's going to be, oh yeah, that's my first option to treat red mites is to douse them in diesel or douse the coop in diesel.
My problem personally with diesel and why I wouldn't really put it anywhere near my birds is mainly a fumes thing. Obviously, birds have very sensitive respiratory systems, and I know a lot of people think that it's not harmful to birds, but it is. Like they are breathing that in. Like you can't eradicate it once you put it in your coop. There's no washing that out. The fumes will be in there for a good amount of time, enough to absorb into your bird through like their airways. And like what you have to remember about any of these like chemicals is like what they breathe in and what goes into their system is going into their eggs, which means like if you eat their eggs, like you're essentially like dosing yourself with the same poisons you're putting in your coop.
Unless you're waiting a long time.
Unless you're waiting.
Yeah.
It's a 10-day withhold is your standard withhold period for any sort of off-the-shelf chemical, but still, even that, I'm not sure. Like, Chris, what do you think of that one?
So like people have to remember, like, okay, diesel has worked for people, but why does it work? There is plenty of other options out there that will be just as effective as diesel that are nowhere near as damaging to birds. So if you were spraying your walls of your coop or any of the cracks with like olive oil from your kitchen, you're going to have the same smothering effect without all the carcinogens that are in diesel, because it is the oil component of diesel that's smothering them. It's not poisoning the mites. It's poisoning your birds, it's poisoning you, but it's not poisoning the mites. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of other oils as well, like essential oils is one of those routes that are semi-effective.
Well, essential oils have a few different research papers. I know your dad is a big fan, Chris, of it used in different areas, and we've talked to him a bit about it. But it can be used as repellents. It can be used as, some of it suggests that there's some cidal activity to it. The concentration has to be pretty high. But it's not just any essential oil either. Like if you really want to get good effects, you kind of have to go to a brew that's been had some research done on it. And I've tried a couple times on different products to do that. Like I showed you that one that I had made. There's a great company in New Plymouth that does chemical mixing, and the product was called Banshee, and it's just a concentrated essential oil mix, and we've had some pretty good success with that.
It makes your coop smell nice.
It smells great. It smells like there's a whole bunch of different great essential oils in there, but those tend to have to be reapplied quite regularly, and
which can be quite expensive.
Yeah, it can be expensive, but it's more like that's one of your tools. But I think the important thing to talk about here is, I think we should continue with the different options, but why nothing is working. You know, some of the reason we went to some of these other products is because like Ripcord for me wasn't working anymore.
There's a lot of resistance.
I was getting heaps of mites resistant to some of the insecticides that we're using, or the miticides that we were using. And I had like farm guys who were just like pumping liters and liters of it in and around the sheds, and sometimes, like, God forbid, even like on birds and stuff, which is not on the label at all. And I don't recommend it, but it just wasn't working. Are you finding, what's your experience with resistance and mite stuff, Chris?
Mites are really up there in terms of being resistant to chemicals. Anything, the shorter the lifespan any organism has, the quicker it can build resistance. And the more you're applying a toxin, you've got, when you put it on, you've got a high concentration. And as time goes on, it's decreasing, decreasing, decreasing. And other pests are coming in at this point, and you get below what is called the lethal residue amount. So then you're in sublethal territory, which means these mites are taking in this. It's not going to be great for them, but it's not going to kill them. And their bodies adapt to dealing with this in their environment. So what's very common to happen is actually a reduction in fecundity, which is egg laying. But when you can't kill something on demand, it doesn't really matter that it only produced 10% less eggs than it used to. It's still going to spiral out of control. So that's where you've got to, like, if you're in a chemical program, you've got to be using several different chemicals to try and mitigate this. And the key word is mitigate, because it's still going to happen. It's just going to happen over a longer period the more chemicals you have available to you. There's lots of chemicals back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Fantastic. Everything you spray it, everything drops dead the next morning. And now the only thing that drops dead is the beneficial insects. Your workers get annoyed at the fumes that are in the sheds. It's you've got
a lot of the damage to human health that we're seeing, like as a delay as well, is quite scary.
Well, the environment, yeah. But you think like resistance, so like a red mite and developing resistance with a lifespan of about 5-7 days there, it's really likely, and we're seeing more and more evidence of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's happening all around New Zealand. Like you can see, like even in your experience with products like Ripcord, because some of these products have horticultural uses. So then they're used in orchards that have got wild birds. These are habitats for potentially for other red mites. We've seen that in some free range birds that are in paddocks that are adjacent to orchards. They keep getting red mites coming back like clockwork.
Yep.
And when you've got these miticides, you got to remember that a lot of them are very same family groups. You got your ivermectin, which is very similar to abamectin and milbemectin, which are used in horticulture. So once a mite becomes resistant to milbemectin, abamectin, it takes a tiny pebble of a stone's throw before ivermectin doesn't work on it either, because it's the same mechanism of killing it. So the body's already 99% adjusted to dealing with it. Yep. So that's where products like that, if you're near an orchard that's using a lot of abamectin, so apples, it's quite common for the use in two-spotted mite and other pest mites in apples. You're going to have a hard job controlling red mites for a long period with ivermectin, and probably even your scaly leg mites and other things like that as well.
Is it the resistance, though, you find it, in my experience, when single actives are involved, it tends to be quicker to get resistance to? Like,
definitely. So when you've got multiple products being used at the same time, you've got you tend to get higher efficacy of killing pests, because there's more ways of killing them, so it's easier for them to die. You get a synergistic effect. When you're using single mode products, at best you're going to kill 80-90% of what's there. You might scare a few away, and the ones that didn't die have just got a little bit of experience about dealing with it next time it comes around, and that's how you start to get a tailing off of your efficacy over time.
Another really good example of this is, like, I guess in the poultry industry, is worming. Worming's another one that
in any industry, worming is a problem.
But like we always suggest that you should either check your birds like
Monitor
them
for worms, yeah.
worms, like check your worming program, because there's a lot of people that rely on like a single active, and they're like, I've been doing it this whole time for years, so like because I'm doing it, therefore it's working. We do find that you should check, because they often fail pretty quickly. So the use of 2 actives or changing your active is super recommended, but again, checking is really really important. Monitoring is super important.
Well, that's the cool thing about like Chris's job and my job is actually fairly similar. We're just different sort of species, really. So Chris is often looking at plant health and stuff like that in the same way that I do, which is why the products kind of are synergistic in that effect, because the problems are often the same.
Yep.
But yeah, so like we've got a lot of single active remedies for red mites.
Yes, and we also have a lot of natural products, which is the next one I want to talk about, is Diatomaceous Earth. DE, Smite, I don't know. It falls under a lot of different names.
Well, we shouldn't be using any brand names on here, just saying. All right, other than Bioforce is one.
And Avian Empire.
Those products that is so sneaky in the changes of its branding and name that people sometimes forget that it is the same product.
Yeah. So do you want me to do it?
I'll get you to explain a little bit about DE and what it is exactly and what its mode of action is to what we know it does.
DE stands for Diatomaceous Earth. It's the remnants of long dead microscopic sea creatures. And these little sea creatures produce this hard shell around them that's made out of silica. It's a naturally forming thing. I think it's why the cliffs of Dover are so white. It can be mined out of the earth. And it's used really well in a lot of engineering areas for things like filters and stuff like that, because it has these sort of really fine particles that can act as microscopic sort of, filters.
Filtration.
But it's used often a lot in different sort of remedies. And some of these have come from long time ago. In fact, a lot of the products that are available now are considered safe for use, not because they work, but because there is no real claims that they're making on it. So for something to be registered for therapy or for medication, you actually have to go through a pretty serious process of doing experiments, providing evidence of that experiment working with the treatment versus control. There's a whole bunch of things. And then to get the product registered for a certain treatment, you have to show all this evidence. And places like here, like the ACVM, take that into consideration and then issue a label with that. DE doesn't go through that because they're not really making any claims. All the claims that are made are just what people think it does. So like,
because it's got a really historical
it's historically used for, and people will tell you that it does this or that, but there's not a lot of evidence out there that it actually does the things that it says it's going to do. So, and one of the things in my job is that making sure that I have evidence that the therapies are going to actually do what we think they're going to do. And so that's where we sort of fall with DE, and why I'm not always, why I'm skeptical of its use, because while I know there are issues, so when silica is inhaled or ingested, it's a very sort of neutral chemical. It doesn't break down naturally, which is why it lasts forever in the Earth's crust. It doesn't actually decompose. And silica is just another form of glass. So basically what you have is microscopic particles of glass that you're spreading around. And the idea is that either they're disrupting the cuticle on the mites, or they're getting into the joints and sort of rupturing their exoskeleton a bit and causing some damage to them. But what also happens is that when you ingest those things, they lodge in the tissues. So any tissue that it goes in, be it your eye, your nose, your lungs, your intestinal tract, it will slowly, parts of it will lodge in your tissue, and you'll get what's called some inflammation around it, and you'll get it's called a granuloma, and it forms sort of it gets walled off by the body to protect it from that foreign piece of material. So, you know, there's evidence that silicosis, when it's inhaled, can cause like large problems in the lungs. And a lot of the miners that used to mine it out of the earth in the UK had this, and it's a well-documented problem. And I haven't seen a lot of papers that really show that it works for this issue, for mites or for intestinal worms and stuff. So like, if anybody has some, I'm happy to read through it and see if it's a proper study and stuff like that. But for me, the bad outweighs the good in this one. You're going to put your chooks potentially at risk of getting silicosis in their lungs, which they do not have large lungs. They have very small lungs. And if those aren't functional, they're going to have a hard time breathing. But you also endanger yourself as well. And lastly, and I'm sure Chris can speak to this too, is that it's not something that is only for red mites. It gets all the insects, good, bad, and otherwise. So you're putting something out there that's just killing everything that's coming through there. And so and while I know some people think it works, or it has shown evidence of working, I think there's a lot of downsides. And it's one that I would be very skeptical of using.
Yeah, from our experience, you have to use copious amounts of it to really get any real traction, because like the people anecdotally say it's like broken glass on the ground for insects, and it's like, well, yeah, like it may seem microscopic to us, but they're tiny, so it actually seems quite large to them. And when we see broken glass on a cricket pitch or a football field, we walk around it, and that's what they do. They walk around it. And if we get a gash in our leg or things like that, you got to remember these guys, these tiny little mites are out there. Every second insect out there is trying to eat them. They're pretty tough and robust. So getting a little bit of broken glass in their knee or their foot's not going to really slow them down. And that's been our experience. And what we've found is, like, as soon as it starts to absorb any moisture or sort of get wet, then it clumps and becomes even less effective.
Yeah.
So it's, albeit like if you can keep it as a dry powder everywhere, yeah, you'll prohibit any life, but even your own life and your bird's life. So yeah.
Yeah.
Not so ideal. So I mean, there's a couple of remedies that we kind of have started, or that we kind of like to use. Chris is a big advocate for one of those, and one of our favorite solutions, which is predator mites, and his product Poultry Defender. We've seen it used in a lot of very large farms and a lot of small sort of backyard situations, and really love the kind of effects that it's kind of giving off.
Yeah, one thing though I always have to say is that, again, we're talking about integrated pest management. So it's using all the tools available. So I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other, or you should just use this, but it's about using what the tools you have smartly and understanding what they do. And I think predator mites, from my experience, offer a sort of a great alternative to some of the other chemicals. Not only are they alive and can chase down some of these parasites, but they can, if the environment is good, they can actually live there and and replicate there. So for me, like, if we can make those work on farms or at houses, that's a win-win for me. You've increased the ecology, you've taken care of a pest, your environment is healthier because they're there. They're not, they don't eat people. They're not bloodsuckers per se. They're insect and egg eaters, from what I've read.
I'll get you to talk a little bit about the predator mites. Your expert.
So Poultry Defender is our product that Sam here helped us bring to market, doing some of the field evaluations and stuff with, because they did find things not working, and we were like, wow, in our experience, to control a mite, you need another mite, because mites have such a quick reproduction system. that if you're using a higher life form like say a ladybird or anything like that, they're not able to eat through them as fast as they're breeding. So that's where pretty much world round, anytime we're controlling a mite, it's actually using another species of mite to do that. And down there underneath the soil, you've got a whole host of little predatory mites that love to eat sort of anything. Anything that's smaller than them, they're kind of almost like chickens. If it's moving, they'll chase it and they'll bite it. It's so there are things they recognize the eggs and they'll chew into those, and other things as soon as they've hatched, they'll go and smash them. So when you look at the behavior of poultry red mite, they need to migrate often on the chicken. So if you can make sure that your chickens have an organic type flooring like sawdust or something that they are sleeping on, then the pest mites need to walk through a field of predatory mites that will ambush them twice a day at dawn and dusk. Given that Poultry Defender's real natural habitat is to stay in the soil, in the top few layers of the media kind of thing, but a few centimeters of the media, they won't usually climb the walls of the enclosure, but we've seen that when it's dimly lit and humid and nice and warm, that they have followed red mites up into their nesting grounds up on the walls. But this behavior is not typical. It's not typical. It can happen, but it's not typical. Usually if you see mites up on the wall, they're not great for your chickens. But yeah, that's in a nutshell how they work. Like, so coming back to what Sam had said earlier, that the more basic your enclosure is, like if it was just a big plane of sawdust that the birds are sitting on at night, that's going to work perfectly. If you've got roosts way up near the roof and ladders and all sorts of places that the birds will be hiding, it's going to take you a lot longer, because the pest mites have got a direct path to the birds if you've got roosts that are attached to the wall or ladders that they're standing on, because Poultry Defender's not going to go, oh, it's time for the mites to start moving, we'll go and walk up the ladder. They're going to be sitting on the floor waiting for them to come past, and if they're not coming past, then they're not going to be killing them. So it's and that's why it's also important, once you put Poultry Defender in, try and make sure your birds spend the whole night in the coop. They're not going off and spreading them out into your neighbor's house or the forest or the garden kind of thing.
Yeah. And we've found that like poultry mites as well, I mean, they're not just eating red mites, like they do eat some other insects, don't they, Chris?
Oh, certainly. So like there's little black flies like sandflies and stuff like that, which can occur in coops and horse stables and stuff. They will have, that's all fair game tucker for them as well. So it's just that
well, those are the fighting ones.
Like
mites, all that stuff.
So it's essentially what you're both saying is coming up with a simplistic design, keeping it as clutter-free as possible, keeping your birds as low to the ground as physically possible in a material that the predator mites can live in. So you're setting them up for success, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do we recommend removing creatures from the coop?
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
During red mite control.
Well, so perches can look like different things. Like you don't always have to have them up. Just realizing that they're a risk factor for red mites, because if your chickens are all up high, the predator mites can't get there. So it's just not one of the tools that you can use with that. You can still have them in there, but the red mites are less likely to be less likely to be eaten by the predator if they're up on a perch. You can still put the predator mites in nest boxes with some of the sawdust and stuff there. Like I recommend that for sure. But like Chris was saying, if you want to protect the bird from the red mite, having a spot where they're sleeping, where these red mites have to go through the predator mite's home is imperative for this one to sort of work. Although saying that, Chris, we've also used it higher up in a lot of the sort of farms and coops that we've been on. So like I've spread them up on like higher shelves or lips of some of these coops and some of these farms. And they tend to find their way down, or at least through the cracks. And I like to think, I haven't proved it yet, but I like to think that they find a few red mites on the way.
I would think they would.
Yeah. They're not used to being up high, so they'll find the organic material where there's food, and they'll move to where the food is. Yeah.
All right, Hender's asking, can the predator mites survive in a covered run?
So this is, I think, in a run with like grass and stuff, just kind of outside.
So technically, yes, yeah. So they're widespread throughout New Zealand. You might find in your area, the reason why you don't have Poultry Defender just smashing the red mites naturally is because their numbers are too low in the wild, or for some reason, like there hasn't been that much life in your run for them to be bothered really migrating there. So you introduce them. So if you've got just a run like that, you got to remember, are the birds sleeping in the run? So if the answer is yes, then it would be good to put them in there. They might spread out over time, but if there's a patch where red mites are coming through all the time, then they're going to really love staying around there because it's a really resource-rich environment. But normally would recommend people to just put it in the coop, because that's usually where the birds are sleeping and where the red mites are hiding. With it being less advantageous to put it in a run unless the birds are sort of just in the run, there's no coops per se.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all based on where the birds are sleeping and where your problem is. So the monitoring becomes a big thing for me. If you can, if they're sleeping out in the outdoor run and you're checking them at night, or, you've noticed on a tree there's a little colony of red mites, or maybe one of the posts, then yeah, sprinkling around there, maybe around where they're doing their dust bathing and stuff like that. So they can get those predator mites sort of around them and or take them with them in that run. Sure. But focusing on where they're sleeping or where they're nesting, definitely where I would sort of put that product preferably. And saying that too, like we often use a composting floor. So a lot of farms, we use sawdust and we compost the bird droppings just there on the floor. And we get a great sort of organic soil forming. So on a lot of farms, we just use that soil. The predator mite just absolutely loves living in there. It's full of other, things for it to eat. And all the birds tend to love dust bathing on the composting floor. And yeah, tends to just absolutely remove all the red mites on those in those areas. And the birds just love it. So they come onto the composting floor, they kick it around, they get in there, open their feathers up, dust bathe, and the predator mites are just everywhere. So there's not a chance in hell that those red mites are getting close to them.
All right, go. Do the predator mites eat northern mites and lice?
Certainly do. The lice is probably not the adults, but it's too big. The eggs in when they'd first hatch, because things like lice and fleas often get dropped off in their pupa forms into grasses and things like that, and then get woken up as an animal's coming past. So lice, there are other biologicals that you can use for them, and fleas, to get them when they're dormant in the grasses. Things like nematodes, like the Nemastar. But northern fowl mite its behavior once it's on the bird is it stays on the bird. So that's when you're using Poultry Defender early, you've got an army surrounding and protecting your chooks.
Yeah.
So when northern fowl comes along, it just gets slaughtered.
Yeah, and that's where we've been putting it in, like the dust bath areas and stuff. And so the bird naturally will pick up a few of them. Yeah, make it a little bit more difficult for the northern fowl. But saying that, we don't have a lot of evidence that it's getting rid of all the northern fowl, but we do think it provides a pretty good barrier for any of those things that are coming on the birds.
Yeah. I guess the other one we should talk about is Exalt, since that's the most popular one that we see online.
Yep, works really well.
It works really well, but the problem again with Exalt is it is another chemical and it is losing its potency. Like there's already enough sort of studies showing that in places like Italy, it's already losing efficacy. Yeah. Which is scary because it is one of the only kind of chemicals that works at this point.
Yeah, well, it's new. It's new to the market as well. It was only brought to market a few years ago. Yeah. Initially in New Zealand, it was thought to be the council that normally does the approvals for this wanted to do it just for under vet script, but that soon folded. So it isn't really covered by vet script, but they have a limited amount of people who can supply it.
Yeah, it's one of those chemicals that's quite expensive. They're not really willing to sell it in small quantities. They're very specific about who they sell it to. So there is a real lacking of it in the market. But because it's come from a very large company as well, they don't really need to
yeah, they've got enough red mite problems that require a leader.
Yeah, so if anyone's ever wondering why they can't get a hold of Exalt or why Exalt is so expensive, it's because it is actually quite hard to get a hold of and it is quite expensive to buy now.
Yeah. But saying that, it is super effective. Like it works really well. If you can get them in there, it will take care of most of your mites.
Yeah,
it tends to knock it back really well. But for me, when I think of Exalt, I think of like we're breaking glass in case of emergency. So if you're having to kind of get to that point, other things probably, or the environment has probably been great for red mites, and they've just sort of flourished with the sort of temperatures and the systems in place, or maybe well, one of our dear friends, Lee, is on here too, and we know she checks for red mites religiously, and she still every so often will get an occurrence of it that has just sort of popped up out of nowhere, suggesting that there's a lot of other factors involved that we just don't really understand.
Yeah. So while if your birds are in like fairly immediate danger and they're losing a lot of blood overnight, because red mites can take a significant amount of blood from a bird if the population is big enough.
Yeah.
Like if you're at that point, then Exalt is really the only sort of way to kind of just reset and overcome that huge burden. But at that point, once you've reset, is kind of where you come in with other solutions like cleaning your coop out really well, covering up all those cracks, making it simple, getting a composting floor in, getting in some predator mites and setting all your traps.
Monitoring systems,
so you can monitor correctly. And chicken keeping is not easy.
It's not.
it's time consuming and very difficult.
But when you're having a problem, that's kind of how we suggest you handle it. If it's a big infestation, you exalt the birds that you need to, and that's usually a 2 treatment at least. And then it's about cleaning. You're never really going to get away from cleaning coops.
Yeah. So with one of the first questions that we had is ivermectin safe for the Bioforce mites. Like I think we can kind of combine this one with the Exalt as to if you used any of those chemicals, when can you put in the predator mites?
Yeah. So you'd want to wait a good week or so that any of the mites that have been in there that have had a lethal dose have died. Any mite that's sort of had a lethal dose and not yet died, because it takes some time for the poison to kill it. But if a Poultry Defender mite eats a mite that's already got a lethal amount of toxin in its gut, it's going to kill it. It's a miticide, it's going to kill the mites. But this is where, like, the worst thing you could do is treat with ivermectin or Exalt and do nothing afterwards, because you've got a bird that has got X concentration of a toxin in it, and that's decreasing every day at a point that when they suck blood from that, it is not toxic. It's just giving them immunity to this compound. So any of these residual adults and stuff, because a lot of adults don't need to feed so often on the birds. It's the young that need to feed because they're growing so rapidly and want to get to sexual maturity. The adults can happily hide away in the wall, just laying eggs that are going to hatch and keep going out to the birds every night. So once you've got rid of this mass number of juvenile red mites, you want to try and get rid of these other breeding adults in the environment as quickly as you can, so that you're not harboring a way to resistance. Because any of these drenches and birds are going to take quite a while to completely be gone. But once they've gone below that sublethal limit on the birds, and this is an arbitrary limit, because the more immunity these mites get, that sublethal just becomes higher and higher, and then it becomes to a point where it is higher than any application you could ever give of Exalt to the chicken. And that's when
it becomes
there's
toxic to the chicken.
Yeah. As Lee's just said here, she obviously used the Exalt, and 3 months later she found them back. So I mean,
but that's what Chris was saying, like the adults hiding.
And these are not natural environments that we have either. Like, depending on how many birds you have, I mean, we are finding that people have a lot of birds, and that's creating a really unnatural environment. So you are just like pointing at your area essentially to bring on.
You're increasing your risk. So you've got to know how to use the tools available, which is what we're trying to talk about. Yeah. That's a great your thoughts there about the adults just being able to lay eggs. It's true, like and I never really heard it put in that way, but that's probably where a lot of the risk is coming from, because they don't really need to go out and do anything. The juveniles just go out and do all the damage.
Gordon is asking if there's any risk of predator mites becoming a problem once introduced.
Nope.
Yeah,
not unless you become an insect yourself. You're pretty safe.
Well, I had one farm where we initially did the research where they had been doing Exalt, I think, every 2 months at one point, because they had a multi-age flock, which is a risk factor when you have a lot of different age groups kind of put together. The barn was never empty of birds, so the mites would just move around. And then we went in and put it in the nest boxes. And again, we have like shavings in the nest boxes. And that's where that video that I posted on our website came from. As soon as they put it in, they started crawling around the nest boxes. You could see them pulling apart the red mite sort of groupings. And they replicated so much that they were looking for ways to get out into the world. And we're kind of crawling out of the barn. They could see them after about a week or so.
Originally, we got a call saying that the mite population had exploded, and we kind of freaked out, got down there. But then we realized it wasn't the red mite population that had exploded, but actually it was the predator.
It was the predators.
So it was just a case of informing people what the difference was in their appearance, the red mites versus the predator mites. But they expand up in populace to food supply, essentially. So the more food you have, the more supply of predator mites you're going to have.
So somebody's asking, Denise or Dennis, I think it's Denise, is asking about not using ripcord, but trying to spray cracks with oil and things like that. Listen, it's all about what you can use in your system. Okay, it's like ripcord still has some effect in some of the mites, but it shouldn't be your only go-to chemical to use. So I would suggest if you're having problems with red mites and they're becoming an issue, one of the things we would do first is reset. Use your Exalt sort of treatment to reset your red mite population. Give it some time, go in and you can clean in those next 2 weeks. Go in and just scrub the coop out, simplify your coop out a bit.
Yep.
Make sure all your cracks are filled in. If it's wood, you can even paint over some of the wood with some safe paints.
Yeah, there are actually some paints specifically for this now too.
Yep, siliconing those or getting those cracks all sort of puttied up and stuff is good. I would do that. Bringing in your organic material for your floor so that you have some place for the predator mites to go. Putting in some monitoring stations, or at least having some places where you know red mites like to go hide and checking there regularly.
Yeah.
It's I think there's a few different ways. I still think ripcord has its place if you use it properly, but
now this is a bit of a misconception that I want to get out here as well, because
we can let Chris talk about this one.
You like this one. Penelope's asking, because she lives in the Southland, that it gets quite cold at night, and has read that predator mites cannot live below 10 degrees. Is this correct?
No. So there is differences like development thresholds. So below 10 degrees, they won't really bother laying any eggs because they think it's wintertime, it's now cold. They'll happily live. They've got to survive through the winter. And remember, you can dig these up in Stewart Island and all other cold countries around the world that even get snow on the ground. So nature finds a way. So if you had an infestation of red mites in midwinter in Invercargill or even Stewart Island, you can still put in Poultry Defender. Their breeding is not going to be as fast. And remember, there is always a difference between soil temperatures and air temperatures. Soil temperatures tend to be a lot warmer and more stable throughout the year. So you'll find if your red mites are actually a problem in winter, the Poultry Defender is actually still going to be able to deal with them because it is certainly not as cold as you think it is. Because the lethal temperature point, like if you put a Poultry Defender in a freezer where it has nothing around it to keep warm or shelter, you could probably kill it at -5. But if it's in the soil, then it can dig down deeper and stay a bit warmer and modulate its temperature. It's going to be able to insulate it with its buddies. So, that's how life still happens in Russia and Siberia and places like that.
But I think the red mites, like the red mites can survive through the winter. I'm figuring the predator mite should be just fine.
Essentially, I assume they need the same sort of temperatures. So if you have one, then the other will be surviving.
Yeah, they'll just survive by going into the cracks in your walls and stuff like that, or even into the ground underneath your coop.
All right, Emma, I have an igloo coop, and luckily there's no signs of mites. What preventative should I use in there? So igloo coops are like, whilst being very tiny, they are very good because they are made of plastic. So not so much a problem for red mites, but I mean, they're still going to come down at nighttime and they still can climb across those walls. But again,
they don't really have a lot of places to live when you have a sort of modular plastic coop like that. So your risk is the interaction with wild birds and them picking stuff up. So like if there's a nest box or something like that that you use to kind of collect eggs, I would probably do some monitoring there, or put one of like our little dowel systems in there where you can check the doweling every couple of days or so. And then I would still probably have some of the predator mites on the ground in your igloo or in the run, just to kind of take care of a lot of those ones that do find their way in. Or if you have a dust bath, I'd be putting some in the dust bath as well. Any thoughts, Chris? Have you seen those igloo ones?
I'd be recommending the same, because we've had a number of people say, like, because by the time they come to us for advice, all sorts of things have happened, and like the birds have ended up sleeping in trees and things like that throughout the yard. And it's like, okay, well now your red mites are kind of everywhere. They're not just in the coop. So sprinkling some around any tall trees on the property or dense foliage kind of thing, because as Sam had mentioned earlier, like red mites were first found in birds' nests, because that's where, you know, they're protected from, easy access, don't have to go so far. So when you've got a nest box in there, like they like dense foliage or hidden areas that it's not natural to be out on an exposed surface. If that's happening, there's a lot of them in there. Yeah, if
you see them on the open wall and stuff crawling around, you have usually a huge problem, eh?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, monitoring is definitely something I consider for everybody. Picking up your bird and having a look too, looking for redness and bites and things like that would be a good idea.
Yeah, inspecting birds is a massive thing. If anyone else has any other questions, now would be the time to ask, and we can answer any of those.
Well, one thing I want to talk to Chris about, I don't know how much time we have left. Oh, we got a few minutes. Is like these are not just the only predator mites. I've been hounding Chris for a while now to help me brew up some other ones. I've got my eye on a Taurus mite that we're interested in, and I think it has a different behavior as well. So there's different predator mites that we'd like to try, but there's also different insects too, that are predators for other things. So the predator mites that you do also take care of those black sort of biting flies, those sand flies that bite you all the time in like summer or down at Lake Tikapo or something like that when you're walking around. So it's great for those as well. So if you have horses and they're getting like nailed by sand flies, or if you've got some pigs at your house that are also getting nailed by sand flies, or indeed yourself, if you have a sandfly problem at your house, they're good for that. But there's other insects. I know we tried a couple different ones. Lee's been a test subject for us a few times now, but I've used some of these on the farm as well. Do you want to just maybe talk about a few of the other species maybe that might be coming down the pipeline if I can bribe you enough?
Oh yeah. They as soon as that shoebox full of cash arrives, then no, there's definitely some other things that are on the cards that we're breeding up and trying in some of the other bird keeping systems. So there are some of the egg farms that are a little bit more artificial. Would really hope they went to deep litter sort of systems, but they're probably not going to. But they can't for whatever reason. They've sort of got caged areas, or they've got trellised type floors because it's for hygiene reasons. Yeah, and because of some of the new systems on the egg farms, even free range egg farms, where they've got a trellising system up to the nest box, and there's a deep litter down below, but because of the trellising is sort of 1 meter or 2 meters above the deep litter, then there's a place for red mites to live when the birds are sitting up on top of there. And if Poultry Defender's down in the litter, there's a lot of other places that the red mites can be and causing a problem. So one, what's referred to as a pirate bug, has been identified in New Zealand. It's cropped up in a couple of horticultural studies as sort of when people weren't spraying, then these would come in and start hoeing into the pest insects. But its other reported home was in birds' nests through the dock sort of work. And through this last season, we've actually had some ongoing trials, mainly in horticulture, but trying to tee up a way of introducing them into these other avian systems as a way of having a predator that can be more mobile, and fly. Yeah, if they do have wings, they can fly around. So what we're trying to think is how we can adapt these systems to make it more homely for these guys to stay around 12 months of the year. So that we can have a standing army ready before the red mites arrive, rather than having to call in the cavalry after we've already been invaded, because no one really wants a big amount of red mites there when they're trying their best to have the best eggs and the best, healthiest chickens all the time.
It's tough.
Yeah. So there's
well, that's cool. Well, like, we've tried a few on the farms, and we think they have some pretty decent potential. Yeah. A lot of the issues we have right now is just monitoring for some of these. So hopefully we can come up with a bit of a project. But I've got the one paper for the predator mite all ready to go. So we'll submit that for the journal article soon. And hopefully it gets accepted as just a good observational paper. We've got a couple other questions though.
Yep. So if I add predator mites to my nesting box, could I clean them out and then replace them? Like, how would I?
When she's cleaning them out, or cleaning out the nest boxes, is she removing them? And the answer will be yeah. If you're taking out the sort of composting areas, that's where they live, that's where they want to be. So keeping those areas kind of clean and ongoing is a good idea.
I mean, like with the nesting box is like a method that we really like. I mean, is like wood shavings as well, just on top, like a littering of wood shavings, so that when your chook is sitting in there laying eggs or in there overnight and then they come out, then it's just a case of scooping off the top small amount and then replacing them. So then you're never really completely pulling it out too often, so you don't really have to worry about that so much. Is probably the easiest way to keep a good population kind of running. Which is probably similar to this next one. Should I change out my deep litter after an infestation? What is the process for a litter after using Exalt, cleaning, and then predator mites?
Yep. Okay. So cleaning after deep litter and infestation of red mites, I would be cleaning the coop. If I had a big infestation, like I said before, I would be using Exalt to reduce my population, and then I would go in and make sure that everything was sanitized, cleaned up, like there was no debris, and then I would be resurfacing and making it less complex as I could. If I needed a perch, I'd have a little
low one.
Yeah, a real low one that's sitting probably
within the shavings.
Either within the shavings or just like a centimeter above. So the bird is just kind of getting up off the wood shavings a little bit to sit there. Nothing massive that the predator mites can't get in and around. And then if I needed to remove all that litter, I would repopulate it with more shavings, pine shavings, and then bring in some more predator mites a few weeks after my second treatment of Exalt. And then I would keep that composting soil going. So just like what we were talking about with the nest box, I wouldn't remove everything. I would be probably just taking out the real sort of droppings and things like that are sort of soiling the litter, but I would keep it sort of going because it's going to compost naturally into a very viable soil, and these predator mites will live there really well. But I know it's a balance between your ammonia and the wetness of your litter and things like that. So, but I wouldn't necessarily clean the whole floor out if I put predator mites in there already, if I didn't have to.
All right, I'm going to skip the last question first. Do you need to top up the population from time to time? Can you see the predator mites? It's good to top them up.
It's good to top them up. Like in the summer months, if you're in a really, really dry area, it can be a benefit to add a bit of moisture into your flooring from time to time, because they do need background moisture to enable them to shed their skins to grow. So if it's too dry, their population's going to drop off. So in these times, like they are the higher risk times, if you are prone to a lot of reinfestations mid and late summer, it would be wise to top them up, but definitely try and maintain a really nice, naturally like composting litter in your coop is going to make it a better environment for the predators. Technically, you can see them with your eye, same as the red mites. They're a bit bigger than the red mite babies, but yeah, bit of a different color, kind of a. They're more of a tan color. Best if you have magnifying glass. They tend to have a little triangle on their back, which is how I recognize them.
Notice them. Yeah, it's a little whitish.
Yeah, a little whitish triangle on the back of the adults.
Just like when you can see a bad red mite population, you know, you'll see a big predator mite population, but one predator versus one red mite, you probably won't see them. But yeah, they are able to be visualized. They're just really small.
Yeah. And I've started using AstroTurf in my nesting boxes. Can the predator mites live in that?
Well, you want me to go, Chris, or do you want to try?
Yeah, you go first.
Well, I would say like AstroTurf is good for like being able to, pulling, like you're pulling that whole AstroTurf out when it's in the nest boxes, getting rid of all the stuff that's on that and putting it back in, and you're ensuring that your eggs are probably going to be nice and clean and stuff too.
Yeah.
But saying that you need organic material for these mites to live. So if you are going to have AstroTurf and you want them in there, you're going to have to put some sort of organic material in there with them. Otherwise, they need that moisture, like Chris was saying. They'll need some of the other food sources as well.
Yeah.
Because that's when there's no prey there, they can eat decomposing plant tissue. So
yeah. Oh, you just muted yourself. Hang on.
There we go.
Yeah, so they can survive off a few different food sources, eh? So other insects like eggs and stuff like that. And they can do some fungi and some plant material as well, from what I've read.
That's definitely right. Yeah. So when you got things like AstroTurf, there's no humidity buffer. Soil's got a humidity buffer. So in soil, you're gonna, like, their optimal humidity is like around 70%. You're not going to really achieve that most of the time in AstroTurf, and it's not going to provide oviposition areas, so places for them to lay eggs or to hide in as an ambush predator. So that's where having something they can kind of dig through and something organic is going to be advantageous, and they can eat this sort of fungi and decaying things when there's no mites around.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a fair bit of Red Mite control. I think some of the take-home messages, like, everything, there's a lot of tools available, from, repellent essential oils, Exalt, predator mites. Some of the insecticides are still working and things like that. They have obvious.
Just have to be a little bit careful about their resistance and also about their potency on your bird if you're using them in close proximity.
Yeah, definitely follow the labels. If anybody's unclear of how to use the things, the labels and instructions of use are very informative and very important to follow too. So if it says do not use in the proximity of livestock or something like that, then it shouldn't be sprayed close to any of your animals or anything like that. Some of them even have regulations that you can't spray them on material where food may be prepared. A nest box could be considered something like that. So just read your labels properly, but lots of tools available. Using them sort of in the right combination or the right order is important. Monitoring is a big part of Red Mite control, being able to make sure you have a problem. And unfortunately, the biggest one is good old Coop Cleaning, so elbow grease.
Yeah, that doesn't have to be too complicated either. You're just looking at soap and water, essentially. Nothing. It doesn't actually have to be that fancy. I mean, there are some great some great natural sort of organic cleaners that I personally like using. Things like Biozyme are really great cleaners. They get used a lot in rehab and in the zoos, quite friendly on birds. But to be honest, good old old-fashioned dishwashing liquid
yeah.
works just as good.
Yep, and then realizing that the red mite has a certain life cycle or certain needs for its life to survive will give you an idea of how to best combat it. So, you know, realizing that it only feeds really at night, realizing it doesn't live on the bird, it likes to live up high in your coops, that it likes the cracks, it needs to stay warm in the winter.
They bloom out in heat and humidity.
Yeah. So when you know those things about them, you can become a bit more aware of how to use the tools in your favor. But we want to say thanks, Chris, for your time tonight. And I'll harass you next week more about the pirate bug.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure I talk for everybody. You know, we really appreciate you on the forums giving your advice to people with regards to red mites and predator mites and the control of those. So, you know, thanks for all your time tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed the talk.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome,
So thanks, guys. We'll end the show and we'll put the video up on our website soon.
Awesome.
Have a good night, Chris.
Thanks. Have a good night. See you. Cheers.